Beginning at the reservoir, you go over a knoll heading south and come to a pumping facility operated by the Salt River Project out in the middle of nowhere. From there comes a pipeline. You see a clearing through the forest with a overhead electric line. If you see that, the pipeline's underneath it. The pumping station pumps water into a pipeline heading towards the rim. On the way, it fills a large 2 million gallon priming tank, which is vital to the operation and equalization of the flow in the pipeline as it travels down the face of the rim. When you get to the edge of the rim where things really start to get interesting, you see another tall tank, which is a vacuum breaker to make sure the event of a water break on the big pipeline that a suction isn't created that collapses the pipeline. Going down the rim is a real scary trip. It drops about 12 to 1,500 vertical feet. It's very steep. It gets to a hydroelectric generator that creates power to power the pumps that pump water out of the lake to feed the project.
They use power from APS to start the pumps up on top of the rim. There's 5 pumps up there, and once those pumps are activated, the water comes down to the SRP generating station and starts generating its own power. Then they don't need the APS power anymore. They're generating their own power, so that power produced goes back up to operate those pumps, and then it is a perpetual motion machine.
The tail race is important, number one, because it is essentially the drain from the hydroelectric generator there that creates electricity, and then the water drains into the East Verde River. Well, Payson had to figure out how were we going to hook into that stream of water coming from Cregan Reservoir to Salt River Project's generator and then to the Verde River. So we could hook on before the generator and put water in Payson's pipeline coming to town, but there's 630 PSI there. So that was some logistical problems. We didn't want to let the water get into the river, and then it has a whole different legal standing and would be subject to disruption by floods and discoloring and things like that. So I said, well, the only way we can do it is get the water after it goes through the generator, and it's protected because it's not in the river yet. So we'll just make a hole in the side of the big drain structure, and that's where water enters Payson Pipeline.
The water, after it goes through that generator, comes out in a big, I believe it's an 8 foot by 8 foot square conduit underground that dumps it into the East Verde River. Our tail race connection will be tied into the bottom of that, so as the water comes out, it'll drop into our connection, and we'll take our share of the water from there into the beginnings of our 18-inch pipeline to bring it down here.
In fall of 2012, construction began on this portion of the project, including a tail race connection in the form of a huge concrete box, meter vault, valving, piping, and other apparatus. The challenges for this project included the limited space for construction and rock excavation.
The tail race area was a potential spotted owl breeding area. So there's a pretty narrow window, which was after the fall breeding season, in which we could do construction.
Originally, the portions of the pipeline were restricted and could not be constructed during the Mexican spotted owl breeding season. And it really restricted dramatically when the construction could occur, and that affected contractors' productivity, which translates into lots of extra cost.
Mexican spotted owl, so that species was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act 1994, and the factors that influenced that species to be listed included increased predation, habitat destruction, and a lack of adequate regulatory mechanisms.
You know, Buzz Walker wanted to know if there was some way to find a different way to accomplish the protection of endangered species Mexican spotted owl during the breeding season. So the question was there another way to accomplish that? So we, through research that was found in a newly updated Mexican spotted owl recovery plan, that was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife document, there had been studies done that found that if you kept the sound levels below 69 decibels, it didn't disturb the owls.
Forest Service engineer and biologist worked with the contractors to determine the noise levels of heavy equipment and potential demolition or blasting that could occur. And then the biologists looked at the distance of the Mexican spotted owl territories from the project work, and it was determined that even though there would be noise disturbance during the breeding season to Mexican spotted owls, that noise disturbance would attenuate because of the topography and the trees and the fact that those territories of owls were over 1.5 miles away from the project work. So after we determined that, we worked with Fish and Wildlife Service and made sure that they supported that determination to continue work during the breeding season. And we were able to continue with the timeline of the project.
It didn't help us any on the timing of building the tail race connection. That took part in the deepest, coldest part of the winter. But knowing that we had another 12.5 miles of pipeline to build from the tail race into Payson, we thought if our construction months for this 12.5 mile pipeline are so limited, it's going to take years bits and piecing that line to get into Payson. So that's where we work with the Forest Service.
The town actually invested the money to pay for the studies that we did. They weren't that complicated, but since then other projects have sort of implemented the same approach rather than have a seasonal restriction, to just have a sound-based restriction.
Yeah, we had the time frame working around the mating season of the spotted owl, and also with the SRP shutdown only being 4 months, we had to work in the winter time because that was the shutdown process or shutdown period.
The tail race was a nightmare because it was done in the winter time. So the contractor was fighting adverse conditions with snow, rain, freezing conditions, but they persevered and made that happen.
So there were issues associated just with the cold to deal with and wet conditions, and really just getting access to the work was difficult. The town really had a very, very competent contractor up there.
That was J&L, yeah. Jerry and Laney Floyd did a great job up there. That winter we had some nice snowstorms that we really needed, and the contractor did a really good job of first using his heavy equipment to move the snow out and then proceed on with the work that he was doing at the tail race. Sometimes we had 2 to 3 feet of snow that fell over a couple-day period, and he was diligent to get out there and move the snow and keep on working.
I can recall people up there operating equipment when it was 10 degrees up there. And so just at some point keeping some of the equipment and the pumps running was a little bit challenging, and there were times the ground was frozen. There was enough snowfall that year where just dealing with the water, keeping them out of the excavations in order to get them dried up to place concrete was very challenging.
I personally wasn't sure how it was going to go, if it was going to be difficult with the town or not, and they proved that they were committed to fulfilling the requirements that they had agreed to, and the fact that we sort of worked together, kind of a buzzword, partnered together to get through it, I think set the stage for working through the other much larger contracts successfully.